It was just another busy morning in the city, the kind where people rush through their routines, barely noticing the world around them. Cars honked, pedestrians weaved through the sidewalks, and the subway station was filled with the usual hum of conversation, tired sighs, and hurried footsteps. Among the crowd stood a young black man, Jamal, no older than 19, dressed in a clean but simple outfit. His sneakers were a bit worn, and his backpack looked heavy, but his posture was upright, his expression calm. He had that quiet confidence of someone who knew where he was going in life, even if others didn't see it yet. As he stepped onto the packed subway, he noticed a pregnant white woman struggling to find a seat. Most people were either too lost in their phones or too preoccupied with their own problems to offer her a place. Without a second thought, Jamal stood up and gestured toward a seat. "Here, ma'am, please take my seat," he said with a kind smile. The woman looked surprised at first, as if she hadn't expected anyone to notice her discomfort. "Oh, thank you," she said, easing into the seat with a grateful sigh. Jamal didn't think much of it. To him, it was just common decency, something his mother had always taught him. But what he didn't know was that this small act of kindness was about to change his life forever. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Officer Reynolds was having a rough morning. He was a seasoned cop, a man who had been in the force long enough to think he had seen it all. But despite his years of experience, there was a hardness about him, an edge that made people uneasy. Some said he had a chip on his shoulder, that he saw the world in a way that left little room for understanding or patience. That morning, as he patrolled the streets, he spotted Jamal walking toward a sleek office building downtown. Something about the young man's presence rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, that quiet confidence. Or maybe it was just an old bias buried deep within him, the kind he would never admit to. Whatever it was, he pulled up beside Jamal. "Hey, you," Officer Reynolds called out, stepping out of his squad car. "Where do you think you're going?" Jamal stopped, confused. "Excuse me? I asked where you're headed." "You look like you don't belong around here," the officer said, his voice firm, laced with something unspoken. Jamal sighed. He had seen this before. He had felt it before. "I actually work in this building," he said, pointing to the glass tower ahead. Reynolds let out a dry chuckle.
"Right.
"And I'm the mayor." Jamal didn't argue. He didn't see the point. But he also didn't back down. Instead, he reached into his pocket, slowly, carefully, and pulled out a sleek ID badge. He held it up, letting the officer read the bold print at the top. Executive Director, Jamal Carter. For the first time, Officer Reynolds was at a loss for words. His face paled slightly as he processed what he was seeing. The kid he had just humiliated wasn't just another pedestrian. He was someone important. And in that moment, as realization dawned, the ground beneath Reynolds seemed to shift. Because Jamal wasn't just any executive. He was his new boss. But that wasn't even the biggest twist of the day. Officer Reynolds stood frozen, staring at the ID card in Jamal's hand. For a moment, the city noise faded, and all he could hear was his own pulse pounding in his ears. He had spent years on the force, believing he could read people in an instant. But now he realized just how wrong he had been. He had assumed Jamal was just some kid wandering into a place he didn't belong. But the truth was staring him right in the face. Jamal watched the officer's expression shift, from authority to confusion, and then something else. Was it embarrassment? Regret? He couldn't tell, and he didn't care to figure it out. He had seen that look too many times before. "Can I go now?" Jamal asked, his voice steady but firm. He wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of moments like this. Reynolds swallowed hard. Yeah, of course," he muttered, stepping back, his usual confidence shaken. Jamal didn't say another word. He tucked his ID back into his pocket and walked past the officer, heading for the building's entrance. But even as he swiped his badge and stepped inside, he could feel Reynolds' eyes on him, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. Up on the 20th floor, the office was already buzzing with morning activity. Assistants hurried from desk to desk, phones rang, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Jamal walked in, greeted by nods and smiles from his team. They knew him, not just as their boss, but as someone who had worked his way up from the bottom. A leader who earned his place through hard work and resilience. "Morning, Mr. Carter," said Lisa, his assistant, handing him a tablet with the day's schedule. "You've got back-to-back meetings and, oh, the new security consultant is supposed to check in today." Jamal took the tablet and nodded. "Thanks, Lisa. I'll take care of it." But before he could settle in, something tugged at his thoughts. The woman on the train. The note she had given him. He hadn't had a chance to read it yet, too caught up in the morning rush. He reached into his pocket, unfolding the small piece of paper. "Thank you for your kindness. If you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out." Beneath the words was a phone number and a name, Rebecca Holloway. Jamal frowned slightly. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. He glanced at the number, debating whether to call. But before he could, Lisa interrupted his thoughts. "There's someone downstairs asking to see you," she said, lowering her voice. "A police officer." Jamal exhaled slowly. He didn't need to ask who it was. "Send him up," he said. Minutes later, Officer Reynolds stepped into the office, looking noticeably out of place among the suits and polished desks. His usual authority seemed to shrink in the presence of people who, for once, outranked him. Jamal leaned back in his chair, watching as the officer approached. "I have to admit, I didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said calmly. Reynolds cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Look, about earlier. I just wanted to," he hesitated, as if the words were foreign to him. "I misjudged you," he finally said. "That was wrong." Jamal studied him for a moment. There was no anger in his expression, no bitterness. He had learned long ago that people showed who they were in moments like these. Some would double down, refuse to admit their mistakes. But Reynolds was here. That meant something. "You know," Jamal said, setting his tablet down, "you're not the first person to make that mistake." Reynolds looked down, nodding. "I figured." Jamal folded his hands. "So, why are you really here?" The officer hesitated again, then let out a slow breath. "I looked you up," he admitted. "Saw your record. Where you came from. You weren't always sitting in an office like this." Jamal's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't like being looked up like some case file, but he kept his expression neutral. And I wanted to understand how you got here," Reynolds said. "A lot of guys like you," he stopped himself, rephrasing. "A lot of people who start where you did don't make it here." Jamal nodded slowly. "That's true." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Jamal leaned forward. "Officer Reynolds, do you want to know the real reason I'm here?" The officer met his gaze, waiting. Jamal tapped the note still resting on his desk. "Because someone believed in me when no one else did. And because, when people tried to push me down, I didn't let them." Reynolds looked at the note, his expression unreadable. "That woman on the train?" he guessed. Jamal shook his head. "No. Someone much earlier. But maybe she's part of the story, too." Reynolds exhaled, nodding slightly. "Well, I appreciate you hearing me out." He glanced at the office around him, as if still processing how wrong he had been about Jamal. "Maybe we'll run into each other again." Jamal offered a small, knowing smile. "Maybe sooner than you think." Reynolds didn't quite understand what he meant. Not yet. But soon he would. Because the world had a funny way of bringing people together in ways they never expected. And this story? It was far from over. Jamal sat in his office long after Officer Reynolds left, staring out the window at the sprawling city below. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the glass towers. But his mind wasn't on the view. It was on the series of strange events that had unfolded in the last 24 hours. First, the encounter with the woman on the train, her note that somehow felt more significant than it should have. Then, Officer Reynolds, who had looked at him as though he were a stranger, someone completely different from the man who had been working his way up the corporate ladder for years. The man who had fought to prove that he was more than what others assumed. Jamal's phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was Lisa, reminding him about the meeting with the new security consultant. But Jamal wasn't focused on that anymore. Something in his gut told him that the encounter with Reynolds wasn't just a random mistake. It was a sign of something bigger. Maybe it was the way Reynolds had looked at him, like he was seeing something for the first time. Maybe it was the way he had admitted his mistake, something Jamal hadn't expected from a man like him. But the tension between them wasn't gone. It had only shifted. Down on the street, Reynolds sat in his squad car, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After leaving Jamal's office, he had gone straight back to his precinct, trying to bury the discomfort in the usual bustle of police work. But it wasn't working. The nagging question wouldn't leave his mind. How could someone like Jamal rise to the top of a corporation like that? It didn't make sense. Not in the world Reynolds had come to know. He had grown up in a world where people like Jamal were supposed to stay down, stay invisible. The rules, the expectations had always been clear. But Jamal's quiet defiance, his refusal to let anyone define his worth, shook Reynolds in a way he wasn't ready to admit. Reynolds knew that he had been wrong about Jamal. But there was more to it. There had to be. How did a kid from the streets make it in a world where people were constantly looking for ways to bring others down? Reynolds needed answers, but the more he thought about it, the less clear it became. Back at the office, Jamal's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. He hesitated before answering, his thoughts still clouded with the events of the day. "Hello? Mr. Carter?" A woman's voice came through the line. It was calm, measured, but there was something underlying in her tone that caught Jamal's attention. "This is Rebecca Holloway. We spoke on the train earlier today." Jamal sat up, the tension rising in his chest. "Yes, I remember you." He had almost forgotten about the brief encounter, but hearing her name again brought the moment rushing back. "What can I do for you?" "I was hoping we could meet in person," Rebecca said. "There's something I need to show you. Something I believe you need to see." Jamal frowned. "What is it?" "I can't explain over the phone," she replied. "But it's important. It's about you, Mr. Carter." Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. The way she said it about you, it felt too personal, too direct. "Where do you want to meet?" "I'll send you the details," Rebecca said, her voice calm but insistent. "Please trust me. It's crucial." Before Jamal could respond, she ended the call. He stared at his phone, uncertainty gnawing at him. What could she want? Why was she suddenly involved in his life? It was just a simple act of kindness on a crowded train, a moment that should have passed without a second thought. And yet, here he was, with more questions than answers. Meanwhile, across town, Lisa, Jamal's assistant, sat at her desk, flipping through a pile of reports. She had been with Jamal for years, seeing him grow from a promising intern to the young executive he was today. But she had also noticed something in the past few months. Something wasn't quite right. Jamal had always been focused, driven, but recently, he seemed distracted. As though there was a weight on his shoulders that he wasn't sharing. She had seen it before in the eyes of ambitious people, especially those who had risen quickly. The pressure of expectations, the fear that one misstep could send it all crashing down. But this was different. Lisa knew Jamal too well to believe that was the source of his unease. There was something else going on. Her thoughts were interrupted when she received a message from Jamal. It was brief, just a location and a time. He was meeting someone, but the message didn't specify who or why. It was unlike him to keep things so vague. Lisa's gut told her something was off. She had always been loyal to Jamal, had always trusted him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening behind the scenes, whether it was with Officer Reynolds, the woman on the train, or some other force, was something she needed to understand. Back at the precinct, Reynolds paced his small office, still unable to shake the discomfort from earlier. The young man, Jamal, had gotten under his skin in a way he didn't like. He was supposed to be in control, but there was something in Jamal's calm, assured demeanor that unsettled him. He grabbed his phone and opened the search engine, typing in Jamal Carter's name. He had already done this before, but now he was looking with a different perspective. The information that came up was nothing new. Jamal had grown up in the rough parts of the city, worked hard to get into college, and then, against all odds, had landed an executive position in one of the most prestigious firms in the country. But there was something buried in the articles, a hint at a past that didn't quite add up. A piece of the puzzle was missing, and Reynolds was determined to find it. Jamal stood there, frozen, as Officer Reynolds' words hung in the air, thick with uncertainty. It was like everything he had known about his life was suddenly being shattered, piece by piece. He looked between Rebecca and Reynolds, trying to make sense of their cryptic warnings. What was this bigger mess they were talking about? And how did they fit into it? Before anyone could speak again, the cafe door swung open with a sharp creak. The bell above it jingled, and the mood in the room shifted immediately. Jamal turned, his heart pounding as he saw a man step inside. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a purposeful stride. His face was partially obscured by a baseball cap, but there was something about him that instantly made Jamal's stomach twist with unease. Rebecca's eyes went wide for a split second, before she quickly masked her surprise. Reynolds, too, seemed to stiffen. Jamal felt a cold chill pass through him as the man walked toward their table, the atmosphere growing heavier with each step. "You shouldn't be here," Rebecca muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, but the tension in it was unmistakable. The man ignored her completely, his gaze fixed on Jamal. There was no warmth in his eyes, only cold calculation. "Mr. Carter," the man said, his voice smooth but carrying a clear edge. "I've been waiting a long time for this moment." Jamal's mind raced, but his body was rooted to the spot. He had no idea who this man was, but the way Rebecca and Reynolds reacted to him made it clear that this was someone important and dangerous. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. "Who are you?" The man smiled slightly, but there was no humor in it. "My name doesn't matter right now. What does matter is that you're about to learn something you've spent your whole life ignoring." He leaned in, his voice dropping lower. "Your past is far from over, Jamal. It's only just begun." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Before the man could answer, Rebecca slammed her palm on the table. "No. This is not how it's supposed to go down. You promised me." But she stopped herself, as though she realized too late that she had said too much. The stranger looked at her briefly, then turned back to Jamal. "You've been living a lie," he said, his words calculated and sharp. "Your whole life, you've been fed a story that wasn't yours to begin with. You think you made it here on your own? You think everything you've done was your choice." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You were never meant to succeed. Not like this." Jamal's breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying? Who the hell are you?" The man's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. "I'm someone who knows the truth. The people who have been watching you, they've been controlling every step you've taken since the day you were born. And now it's time for you to finally understand why." A cold sweat broke out across Jamal's forehead. This felt like a nightmare, like some twisted game he didn't understand. His mind was racing, trying to grasp what was happening. "What do you mean, controlling every step? Who the hell are these people?" The stranger smirked, then turned his gaze to Rebecca. "You told him too much, didn't you? You thought he was ready." He shook his head slowly, as though he pitied her. "You're not ready, Jamal. You're nowhere near ready." At that moment, something clicked in Jamal's mind. He remembered what Officer Reynolds had said earlier, that the people who wanted him to fail had been watching him for years. What if everything he thought he knew about his rise to success was part of some bigger game? What if he hadn't earned his place in the office on his own? Jamal looked at Rebecca, the weight of everything suddenly crashing down on him. "What's the truth? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Rebecca's eyes darted between the man and Jamal, clearly torn. She opened her mouth to speak, but just then, the stranger reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek, black folder. He slid it across the table toward Jamal, his eyes cold and unblinking. "This is the file that changes everything," he said, his voice low. "Open it." Jamal hesitated for a moment, his hands trembling. What could possibly be in there? But curiosity and fear pushed him forward. He tore open the folder and spread it out on the table, his eyes scanning the papers. It was a collection of documents, newspaper clippings, photos, and official papers with dates and locations marked in red ink. The first article he saw was about a young man, his face a few years younger, but unmistakably him. The headline read, "Local teenager disappears after alleged police incident." Jamal's heart pounded as he scanned the details, his mind racing. The incident was described vaguely, but it involved a police officer, and Officer Reynolds was mentioned in the article, his name alongside Jamal's as a witness. Jamal turned the page, his hands shaking as he read the next article. It was about a corporation he now realized was the very one he worked for. There were mentions of discreet background checks and influence from outside sources, but the real shock came in the form of a name, his mother's name. She had been involved with the company in some way, but the details were unclear. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it all. His rise, his career, his every move. Had it all been orchestrated? Was it really his success? Or had it been a carefully planned game from the start? Rebecca watched him closely, her expression pained but resigned. I told you there was more to your story, Jamal. This is just the beginning. But now you need to decide. The people who control all of this, they're not done with you. They'll never be done. Jamal's thoughts were a blur, but one thing was clear now. His entire life had been a lie. He wasn't in control. He never had been. And whoever this man was, whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop until they had him right where they wanted him. As the weight of this truth settled over him, Jamal felt the walls closing in, the stakes higher than they had ever been before. He wasn't just fighting for his career or his freedom anymore. He was fighting for his very identity. And just when he thought things couldn't get worse, the phone on the table buzzed loudly, its screen lighting up with an unexpected name. Lisa. Jamal's hand hovered over the buzzing phone, his heart pounding in his chest. Everything he thought he knew was unraveling right before his eyes, and now this call from Lisa. What could she possibly want at a moment like this? He glanced up at Rebecca and the stranger, both of them watching him intently, as if they already knew what was coming. He didn't know whether to answer or ignore it, but the tension in the room was suffocating, and something deep inside him told him he needed to know what Lisa had to say. He picked up the phone and answered it without a second thought. Lisa? What's going on? Her voice came through, tight and shaky. Jamal, you need to listen to me. There's no time to explain everything, but I need you to be careful. There are people at the office. They know what you're doing right now. They're coming for you. Jamal's blood ran cold. What do you mean, coming for me? His mind flashed back to the mysterious people he'd seen in the files, the ones who had been watching him. Who? Who's behind this? Just trust me. Lisa's voice was urgent. They're already in the building. They're after you, Jamal. You have to get out of there right now. It's not safe. His heart was racing, but he couldn't focus on the panic in her voice. There was something in the back of his mind, something he had overlooked. The pieces were starting to click together. The stranger, the mysterious files, the way Rebecca and Reynolds had acted. Everything was coming full circle. But Lisa's warning pulled him out of his thoughts. He looked at the stranger. Who are you really? Jamal demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. What do you want from me? The man didn't flinch. His face remained a mask of indifference. I already told you, he said, his tone cold. You've been a pawn in this game for a long time, Jamal. But now you have to choose. You either walk away and let the system continue, or you stand up and fight. He paused, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his lips. But be warned, there's no going back once you make that decision. Jamal's pulse quickened. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The corporate world he'd worked his way up in, the life he'd fought so hard to build, it was all connected to something much darker. The people who had controlled his past were still controlling his future. And the game was far from over. He gripped the phone tighter, his mind racing. Lisa, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm coming to the office now. Jamal, no. Her voice cracked with fear. It's too dangerous. They know everything. I don't know how, but... The line went dead. Jamal stood there, the phone still pressed to his ear, his mind reeling. Something wasn't right. The stakes had been raised higher than he could have ever imagined. They were already waiting for him. And now, with every second that passed, the walls were closing in. Before he could make a move, Reynolds stepped forward, his voice low. You don't have to do this, Jamal. It's not too late to back out. You don't know what you're up against. There was something in his eyes now, something that seemed almost desperate. But Jamal was beyond listening to warnings. "No," he said firmly. "I'm going to the office. If they want to fight, they'll get one." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the cafe. As he stepped into the street, the cool night air hit him like a slap in the face. The weight of the situation settled over him, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to hesitate now. He didn't know who was waiting for him at the office or what they wanted, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was bigger than anything he'd ever imagined. It was about power. It was about control. And it was about taking back what was his. He drove fast, the city lights blurring as he raced toward the office building. The streets felt eerily empty as he passed through the familiar areas. But in the back of his mind, something kept nagging at him. The question of how deep this conspiracy went, how many people were involved. As he neared the building, his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, his heart pounding harder in his chest. The building loomed ahead, its tall, imposing structure casting long shadows in the darkness. Jamal parked in the underground garage and made his way inside, every step echoing in the hollow space. His senses were on high alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap, but he had come too far to turn back now. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped inside, the numbers on the screen ticking upward with each passing floor. When the doors opened on his floor, he found it eerily quiet, too quiet. The lights flickered slightly, and the air felt thick with tension. Jamal stepped out cautiously, looking around. Something wasn't right. As he moved through the hall, he caught sight of Lisa's desk, but she wasn't there. Neither was anyone else. The offices were empty, silent. A sudden noise behind him made him spin around. He barely had time to react before a sharp pain exploded in his chest. His hand went instinctively to the wound, but there was no time to process what was happening. Another figure stepped from the shadows, someone he hadn't expected. It was Lisa. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "I didn't want to do this, Jamal," she whispered, holding a gun in her trembling hands. "But they're going to kill me if I don't." Jamal's breath caught in his throat. "Lisa, what are you doing?" She swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't have a choice. I tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen. They know everything about us, about you. They've been controlling you all along." The words hit Jamal like a punch to the gut. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of the betrayal. But before he could react, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. More figures emerged from the shadows. Reynolds, the stranger, and several others. And then, the final twist hit him. He realized too late that the game he had thought he was playing wasn't one he could win. It had never been his to begin with.